She's an actress, improviser, and stand-up comic, and she has a passion for bridges, ice cream, traffic cones, and aimless wandering. Please welcome Mary Brownlee.
The topic of my presentation this evening is the history of people who have gone over Niagara Falls in a barrel and other fun containers. And I'm going to tell you right now that the most interesting thing I found in all of this is how many people throughout history simply had the profession of daredevil. And how that is very much on the decline. It's kind of a bummer, actually. I might change careers. So when I was 11, I went with my family to visit Niagara Falls. There we are. Which was the first in what would ultimately be 6 different family vacations to Canada. We were not party people. But on this particular trip, because I was a weird-ass kid, I fell completely and totally in loving admiration for this woman. This is Annie Edson Taylor, the first person to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel. Not just the first woman, person. Ladies, we are breaking glass ceilings tonight. In 9th grade, I wrote an essay about how she was my personal hero. My teacher wrote in the margin, "Great essay, but please don't follow in her footsteps." Here's why. In 1901, Annie was 63 years old, but told people she was 40. Some things never change. She had struggled to make ends meet most of her life, and as a kind of last-ditch retirement plan, she thought, maybe I could make some money by going over Niagara Falls. And if I don't succeed, I'll be dead, which is probably also fine. So she fancied up her barrel with some old mattresses. It was basically a Motel 6, but nicer. But even with all these mattress safety precautions, she wanted to test it out. So she first sent over a cat. I am seriously disappointed that not more is known about this cat. But the cat survived, perhaps one life shorter. And it did agree to some photo ops. And then it was Annie's turn. So on October 24th, her 40th birthday, she grabbed her lucky heart-shaped pillow and took the plunge. The whole ride took about 20 minutes, and people waiting at the bottom fished her out of the barrel and found her alive. She had only a few bumps and bruises, though she was quoted as saying she'd rather stand in front of a loaded cannon than ever do it again. And then she milked the shit out of it. She went on tour, she gave speeches, she took lots of pictures with the barrel, living the high life. And then, in typical man fashion, her fucking manager ran away with the barrel and it was never seen again. Which I don't know what he did with it. Like, he ran away with it, but he couldn't make money off of it anymore because people knew it was hers. But she died many years later, just as poor as she was when she started. And just so you're prepared, this doesn't get a whole lot less morbid, so just that one. The next person to give this a go was a professional stuntman with the circus, a man named Bobby Leach, who attempted the feat in 1911. He had a much fancier barrel. He went over and broke all sorts of bones and spent a long time in the hospital, but he survived, he made a comeback, and again in typical man fashion, he was able to have a very successful career touring the world talking about his courageous stunt. He died 15 years later, lived a long life, but he died after he slipped on an orange peel. Stuntman my ass. Right? This is Charles Stevens. In his underwear, I guess. I think maybe that made you look like a badass back then. I'm not sure. But in 1920, he earned the illustrious honor of being the first person to die going over Niagara Falls in a barrel. Charlie here, for some reason, put an anvil in the barrel with him. The internet says this was for something called ballast. That's a fancy physics thing, I don't know, but it did not work out for him. His right severed arm, the only thing they found of him, is buried in Ontario. Then there's the guy who decided to go over in whatever this thing is. I didn't even do anything to this photo. That's just it. It's in a museum now. It's a big bubblegum ball. Then in 1930, a man named George Stathakis tried it out. He wanted to attempt this stunt in order to raise money to print the book he was writing on metaphysical experiences. Coming from this particular group of people, I am not surprised by that at all. So Mr. Stathakis built one of the largest barrels ever built for this particular purpose, 10 feet by 5 feet. Someone's overcompensating. And he took with him his 150-year-old pet turtle, Sunny. Unfortunately, his massive barrel was just a bit too big. It got sucked up behind the falls where it could not be retrieved for 20 hours and he suffocated. But Sunny made it! That's a win. And then we had no falls attempts for about 21 years. The Depression, some wars you may have heard of. People were just like, we're all going to die anyway, let's not push it. But in 1951, a guy named Red Hill Jr., whose father, Red Hill Sr., was also a stuntman and almost definitely had some daddy issues, went over the falls in this thing. No, that's actually what he called it, the thing. But apparently the thing was pretty shoddy. It broke apart instantly, and our man Red did not survive. After Red's death, it was the first time in 50 years that people have been doing this shit that the public was like, what the fuck? And in 1951, it officially became illegal to go over the falls in anything. But that did not stop them. In 1960, Nathan Boya, alias William Fitzgerald, decided to take the plunge. He created another big rubber ball thing that he christened the Plungosphere. This guy has an interesting and very confusing story. He was kind of the first person to do it who was not really interested in fame and fortune. At the time, he said he was more interested in the science of it all and that it was just something he really had to do. It was later revealed as this kind of like scandal that he had actually recently broken off an engagement and wanted to take the trip as some kind of penance, as Niagara was going to be the location of their honeymoon. The equivalent of this in my life today would be like if every one of y'all who's ever ghosted me would just go take a swim in the East River, maybe you'll get dysentery. Deal? Okay, great. Then we have another few years of drought. Drought, water jokes. Okay. But in 1984, we get our first color photograph of one of these idiots. And oh my God, it is just so 80s. Carol Susek was another professional daredevil. He did a lot of tests with his very chic barrel and made a mostly successful trip. He was planning on exploiting his fame by creating a show at the Astrodome where he and his barrel would drop from 180 feet into a tank of water. And believe it or not, he died on the first try. And his barrel completely shattered. Then we have this guy. His name is Steve Trotter, and he just looks like a douchebag, right? And this guy who went by Super Dave, so we know he's a douchebag. Both of them went over the falls in 1985. Steve here was also the youngest person to ever go over the falls at just 22 years old. Super Dave was just regular old, like, professional daredevil who is declining in popularity and dexterity age. And they both survived. All hail the power of douchebaggery, right? Then, in 1989, Peter DeBernardi and Jeffrey Petovich were the first people to do a tandem jump And like any good Canadians, they jumped wearing hockey helmets inside their very strong barrel. They said their stunt was done to promote drug awareness. To show kids that there are better things to do in life than drugs. Wrong meaning of dare, am I right? Dare. Then these two come back! Both of them! In 93, Super Dave becomes the first person to go over the falls twice. And in 1995, Steve jumped again, this time also a tandem jump with a woman named Lori Martin, the second woman to ever do the deed. Surprise, surprise, there's not a lot of information about her, but there is this very unflattering picture I made of her. Now, in the modern era, we begin to see people who are just like, fuck the barrel, and have been going over with less and less help. Jesse Sharp went over in 1990 in a kayak. He died. Robert Overcracker went over on a jet ski with a parachute that did not deploy. He died. And they crashed into each other in an epic Niagara Falls battle. Okay, that part didn't happen. I made that up. But finally, most recently, Kirk Jones in 2003, he went over with nothing at all, but survived. His friends were supposed to record it, but they were too drunk to work the camera. He was banned from Canada and quoted as saying he'd never do it again. So in 2017, he did. This time in a large rubber ball, he was less successful this time. But too much mystery surrounds him and his ball, because the ball was witnessed floating without anyone inside of it, but his body was found months after the ball was. Clearly the calls of the fall is very strong, and I'm glad you're all here tonight to learn with me about these daredevils and dummies, because if there was one thing all these people had in common is that they always wanted people talking about them.